So we've been looking at the minor prophets, and if you look at our schedule here, November 3rd, we're looking at Obadiah. It's one of the shortest books in the Bible. It only has one chapter, and it's really just divided into different verses in that one section. And it has to do with the people of Judah and Israel, and yet the topic is Edom. And we'll notice that in just a moment. Next week, we'll be looking at one of the more famous minor prophets, the prophet Jonah, or the book of Jonah, which has 4 chapters. And we'll look at that in 1 week as well. We're just kind of doing a survey, kind of an overview of these interesting books. You see on the chart in front of you that they have to deal with the time period in which they are focused on has to do with the exile. The second most prominent event in the history of God's people in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, is the Babylonian captivity. The first most important event as a nation is when they were coming out of Egypt and conquering the land of Israel and becoming a nation in that place. That's the number one event that defines the people of Israel. The number 2 event, of course, as I just mentioned, is when they got kicked out of that land by God. Now, the prophets are the ones that tell us why it happened. If you were living in that period of time in the vicissitudes of history, you thought that this was just because Sennacherib or Ashurbanipal or one of these Assyrian kings was wanting to expand his empire, and that's why it happened. And then after that period, it was the Babylonians and Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar, after his famous battle at Carchemish, takes power. And it was because of what he was wanting to do. And yet the prophets tell us, no, it wasn't just the strange twist of fate that we might think it was. It was God acting in human history, using empires and nations to accomplish his purpose. And the prophets are the ones that explain that. So even though this book that we're about to look at seems as if it is directed against the people of Edom, that's a false idea. That's not really who it was addressed to. It was addressed to God's people. The Edomites could care less about Israelite literature. They wouldn't read it. They wouldn't meditate or reflect on it or see what it might mean. It's directed to them to show them that their time is about to happen and they're going down. It's like two teams are battling, maybe a hockey game or a football game or a soccer match, and the people in the crowd are saying, we will rock you, right? That's designed to sort of intimidate the other side, but what else is it designed to do? To encourage your team to fight on. That's what's happening here. Obadiah and the prophets, when the prophets are saying, you're going down, Babylon, you're going down, Edom, that's not for the Babylonians. They don't believe it. They don't think that you could do anything about what their power is. That's for the people of Judah to say, we're down and out, but we're coming back. We're down, we're cast down, but we're not destroyed. God is on our side, and we can come back and win. That's what this is all about. And so we look at Obadiah. Last week we looked at the book of Amos. Think about the number of verses in each of these books. Amos has 9 chapters. Obadiah just has 1. And so we'll just kind of look a little bit at the last part of Amos in just a moment. I mentioned this here in January or in February, the Florida College lectureship is going to be focused on these books, the minor prophets. And I mentioned that so that you might think about opening your schedule to attend some of these. And I'll be talking about Obadiah and Nahum at that lectureship. And there's going to be a lot of speakers that have prepared a good amount of material to talk about these things. As we go through looking at the prophets, I've mentioned before that there are three themes that kind of are recurring. There are three focal points that just keep coming up. When you're reading a paragraph, you can almost think, well, that paragraph fits one of these things. It will be sin, either the sin of God's people, which is why they were going into captivity in the first place, or, as we see from Obadiah, it would be the sin of the Edomites, which God would punish them for what they did. We'll see this a little bit later in the book of Habakkuk, but Habakkuk was a very sensitive prophet who had seen what was going on in his nation. And he was asking God, hey, what's up with this? Why are you allowing all this evil to go on in my society? This is what Habakkuk was saying. There's a lot of evil stuff happening in my nation, the nation of Judah. And God answers him and says, well, really, Habakkuk, I'm on it. As we speak, I'm raising up the Babylonians to destroy your people, and that's going to be their punishment. Question answered. I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but Habakkuk has a follow-up question. Wait a minute, Lord. They're worse than we are. So if you're using the Babylonians now your people need punishment. I admit it. I'm just asking you for it. Why are you waiting for all this punishment, this evil? And God says, I'm on it. I'm sending the Babylonians. They're going to destroy you, and that'll be the retribution that needs to happen. And Habakkuk says, but they're worse than we are. How can you send a nation that is worse, like the Babylonians and previously the Assyrians and later on the Greeks and then the Romans? And how can you do that? Do you remember God's answer to Habakkuk? It's quoted 3 times in the New Testament. The just or the righteous shall live by faith. God is basically saying, I'm not sending you a flow chart. I'm not giving you a storyboard, tell you this. You're just going to have to trust me. You're just going to have to take it on faith. And so the 3 themes involve sin of God's people, and then judgment of God's people. And the way that God is going to judge his people, he's going to send a wicked, despicable nation to do the dirty work. Why? Well, they're qualified to do the dirty work. They're strong. They're mighty. They know how to wield the sword. They can do my bidding just fine. And after I'm done with them, I'm going to judge them too, because they have done significant evil of their own. And the message of the prophets is basically, you may not understand all these vicissitudes of history from a high-level perspective because you don't have that high-level perspective. Who does, brothers and sisters? God has that high-level perspective. Has he given us all of the minutiae details of all the things that are, going to be going on? No. He's given us the broad picture. He's given us what we need. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness, that the man and the woman of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. So we can be furnished, we could be supplied with the things that we need, which is why we have Bible studies, by the way, so that we can be supplied with the things that we need in order to be effective servants of God in our generation. Understanding that from our perspective here, with our feet planted firmly on planet Earth, we don't see the whole picture. We're very curious. We have the mind that God gave us that is asking those kinds of questions like Habakkuk was asking. But we don't have all the answers. And God has not given us all the details, but he's given us the important things that we need to know. And when we trust on those things, we will be prepared. This third point of restoration is that even though God was going to punish his people by using wicked nations and then eventually punish those wicked nations, he was going to bring his people back home someday. There's this element of hope. When we read the prophets, and not just the minor prophets, but also the big books like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, those books tell us that God had a promise from the very beginning to bring the people after the punishment back home. And then he would send a new king, a Messiah, a Mashiach. In the Greek, it's called Christos. We get the word Christ from the Hebrew Mashiach, and it's translated into the Greek Christos, or Christ. And so the promise that God gave those people was that there's going to be a return physically to the land for a remnant, but it goes beyond that. The hope that God is going to give goes beyond the people of Judah and Israel that went back home under the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. It was going to be where God would establish a kingdom, just like Jeremiah said, that in those days, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, like all these other kingdoms are destroyed. And so the hope that was sent through the prophets was to look for something beyond the immediate physical repatriation back home to Israel, but to look at something much bigger than that, where Jesus would come and bring forth a new kingdom, where they would sing a new song, and that they would be a new people with a new name, which is what we are today. If you look at the last passage of the book of Amos, before we get into Obadiah, you'll notice in verse 11 that says, "In that day I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and that all nations who are called by my name, says the Lord who does this." Did you see the part that it says David is mentioned there? That, ladies and gentlemen, is a messianic prophecy. It's talking about the reestablishment of the Messiah, God's people through the Messiah. And it's the same kind of thing that we read about in Ezekiel chapter 37 and in Isaiah chapter 53, when Jesus is the suffering servant, and all of these messianic promises that we have. Not every book is going to contain a messianic prophecy, but a lot of the messianic prophecies are found in the corpus, or that body of literature we call the prophets. And so Amos talks about judgment because of sin, but beyond the judgment there will be a time of hope and reestablishment. And it's going to follow this line that we call David. The New Testament, of course, begins, the very first verse of the New Testament is that this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, who is the son of David, the son of Abraham, showing that lineage, because God had made a promise to David about an everlasting kingdom that would be established. He made a promise to Abraham that in your seed all families of the earth would be blessed, and ultimately that comes forward and to fruition through Jesus Christ. So let's look at the book of Obadiah, the vision of Obadiah. And it tells us here that this is going to happen, thus says the Lord concerning Edom. It mentions Edom here. And Edom is from the lineage of Esau. And someone tell me, who was Esau in the Old Testament, going back to the book of Genesis? Who is Esau? Yeah, Jacob. Okay. Yes, that's right. So you have Esau and Jacob, and they were at odds. The Bible talks about them being very distinctively different. They weren't, Esau sold his birthright. What good is my birthright if, I'm dying here of hunger? I think he was exaggerating that, but no doubt he was hungry. No doubt his stomach was growling, and he felt that way, but, it's the disproportionate exchange is what the Bible condemns. I mean, yeah, you don't give up your birthright for one meal. I mean, for a mess of pottage, you're going to give up so much? That's not a good trade. But he did it. Jacob was not perfect. He's described in the scriptures as someone who deceives, who lies a lot. And in spite of that weakness and that tendency to not say the truth, God used him in a powerful way. And so you have the children of Israel that come from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes that come from Jacob. And so the point of all that is that Edom, the descendants of Esau, were they related by blood to the Israelites? And the answer is yes. You really have a loyalty to the blood relatives if you're going to have preference. Blood is thicker than water, as they say. And yet, if you hate your brother, you want your brother to be defeated, you rejoice at his defeat, you laugh at his defeat, you help his enemies defeat him. That's what the people of Edom did, by the way. They assisted the Babylonians in granting access to the territories through their region to destroy the people, to destroy their brother, Israel. And so it tells us here that we have heard tidings from the Lord. A messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. Notice the use of the second person singular pronoun here. I will make you. Who's the you? It's directed against Edom. I've already mentioned that the people of Edom didn't have much interest in Israelite literature. They weren't going to be reading this and reflecting upon it. It was written for the people of Judah in captivity and at home when some of their relatives were in Babylon in captivity, to give them encouragement that they will have a time of restoration, that God has not forgotten them. And so this is like, we will rock you. That's the idea. I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, whose dwelling is high, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. Now, this is not literal. They don't live in the stars. This is not Spaceship Enterprise, okay? What you might recall when our troops were in Afghanistan years ago, that many of our soldiers were killed because they were in a territory that was rugged and the terrain was on mountainous regions. There were all kinds of clefts and hills and rocks and caves. And who knew that territory better than anyone? The Afghans. Did our troops who come from Florida and Texas and Montana know that territory No. So in a lot of cases, they were sitting ducks in that region. And that's how the people of Edom were. They lived in that kind of territory on the Transjordan side. They had high hills, and if you go to visit that region, you can see and say, that's impressive. They actually live up there? Yeah, they do. And they know all of the ways, all of the paths to get to those spots. And from up there, who's gonna get you? And from that vantage point, can you see if there's somebody even trying to come up and get you? Yep. And that gives you time to prepare, get your battles, throw stuff down at them, and whatever. And God is saying, I know your ambition and your pride, and that you live up there in what you think is so high up in the stars. But even though you think you're safe, you're not. I'm going to bring you down. And that's what this is really focusing on. Sometimes we read these verses and we're not putting these things in the context that I'm attempting to give you. And so we just open this up and we read it and we say, well, what's this talking about? That you live in the stars, even though you're set, you soar aloft like the eagle. What's that? How are they like an eagle? Well, they're right. Eagles fly up there. Have you ever seen mountainous regions and the eagles and the hawks and what happens? They're just as high as the mountains. And if you're up in the mountains, sometimes the eagles are flying this way, right across your vision. You don't have to look up to see the eagles. You can look down and see the eagles. That's your perspective. That's their geography. And it gave them a real good sense of security. And God is saying, don't be so secure. I'm going to bring you down. Now keep in mind what I mentioned. This is not for the Edomites. They're not reading this or hearing these oracles. This is for the people of Judah. When these evil people finally get their just deserts. So that the people of Israel and Judah are going to, their restoration will be that the fortunes that are going the way of the Edomites apparently are going to be reversed, and the ones that were winning are going to be down at the bottom, and the ones that were losing are going to be up at the top, the people of Judah. Now, before we think, well, that's just too vindictive and vengeful, and why do you want justice like that, retribution? Well, again, let's look in the New Testament for some perspective here. Look with me in the book of Romans, chapter 12. And in verse 17, the Apostle Paul is speaking to Christians, first the ones that were living in Rome, but also, by extension, those that are living in Citrus Park, Florida, many years later. He's saying this to us too. He says, repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. We sometimes feel like it, but Paul says, don't do it. Leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. For by doing so, you will do what? What's the image and what's the picture he has in mind? If you feed your hungry enemy and you give drink to your thirsty enemy, instead of doing evil, you're doing good things for him. But he says, what are you thinking about? What is actually happening when you do that? He says, you're heaping burning coals on his head. Doesn't that make you feel better to do that? And that is the idea. It's the we will rock you theme. I'm quoting too much from 1977, aren't I? I'm giving away my generation, sorry. But he says, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Yes, sir. Yeah, we kill them with kindness. And that's going to do two things. First of all, they're not expecting it. They're expecting you to have retribution or lash out. So it's going to catch them by surprise, right? And they're going to be caught off guard. And they're going to say, well, why are you doing that? Well, because Jesus tells us to. Jesus, who's that? And then this enemy of yours starts to become warmed to the gospel and maybe is converted to Christ, and therefore he's no longer your enemy. That's the kind of thing that truly ends up as a win-win situation, doesn't it? But keep in mind that what Paul was writing to the Romans was centuries after what Obadiah was preaching in his oracles. And there was a process of time for God's people. I mean, this is a large body of literature from Genesis all the way through Malachi. and from Matthew all the way through Revelation, there's some themes that are threading it consistently, and there are some things that are developed over time. Like Jesus said, you have heard it was said, an eye for an eye, or this type of thing. But I say unto you, just like Holly was talking to us about the Sermon on the Mount last quarter. The common people thought that was just astonishing for someone to say that. But Jesus had their attention. And Paul had the attention of the people of Rome here as well. The Edomites, they wouldn't be concerned, but the descendants of Edom and the descendants of Babylon and the descendants of Assyria and the descendants of Judah and Israel and the descendants of the American Indian and the European settlers and so forth are all people. Jesus' invitation and the gospel message is for all humanity. Just like as God was saying the promise to Abraham that it's in you, in your seed, Abraham, that all of the families will ultimately have rest and peace. I have chosen you and your family. And so that's, we can look at it and say, well, why the Israelites? Why the children of Abraham? It was God's choice. That goes again to the high level perspective. Why didn't God choose the Greeks or the Chinese or something? We don't know. It's God's choice. We accept God's choice. And when we look at the whole flow of history, we realize that God's people today are not a Jew outwardly, but those who are Jews inwardly. Romans chapter 2. And so I understand there's a lot of people in our generation that don't understand that. And they think that even American foreign policy has to be based on the biblical instruction of Israel as a nation. No, that's not it there at all. God's promises have been fulfilled as far as the Israelite nation politically is concerned. God's people today are the spiritual Israel. Now, having said that, American policy might have an ally in the modern state of Israel, and there may be reasons to support them in that way, but it's not because of a promise in Joshua chapter 24 or something. No, that's not the reason. All of those things have been fulfilled. They have been fulfilled. And so, again, I don't want to go too far afield here, but what I'm saying is that these prophecies of the Old Testament have a perspective that comes from God, and God is detailing that to the prophet, and the prophet reveals that information. Obadiah wasn't just a brilliant genius that knew all this. No, God told him what to say. Amos, he didn't set out to do prophecy. He didn't say, well, I went to school to be a prophet, and I did pretty good and I got good grades. No, he didn't say that. He said, I was no prophet, nor even the son of a prophet. I was a herdsman, a tender of sycamore trees, minding my own business, and God called me to prophesy to the people of Israel. Who was I to resist, right? God tells me to go, I go. Jonah, we'll see next week, God says go, and he says, no, not so much. I don't want to do it. He goes in the opposite direction. We'll talk about that next week. The prophecy of Jonah is very interesting, and I think you'll like that. So if we continue with this point in Obadiah, you see here a little map of where the people of Edom are located. Right here at the bottom. Here's the kingdom of Judah. Here's Jerusalem up here. Here's the kingdom of Israel, Samaria. And then across over here you have the people of Ammon, and then you have the people of Moab, and then you have the people of Edom right here to the south. We know the origins of these nations. The Lot's daughters, sort of a scandalous relationship that was going on there, but they got impregnated by their father, drunken father. They did this intentionally, and the children that they bore were the ancestors, the progenitors of the people of Moab and the people of Ammon. We've already discussed the people of Edom coming from Esau, Jacob's twin brother, fraternal twins, not identical twins, right? And so the people of Edom, if you think about this, the geography of this, to the south here you have Egypt, to the east you have the desert region. And so in order to march in this territory, all the people from the north, like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, had to come through Israel, and the Egyptians, if they wanted to do trade or military movements, they had to go up north through the land of Palestine, sometimes called the Levant. This is all part, if you look at the whole picture of the ancient Near East and the contemporary part of that world, they used to call that the Fertile Crescent, a crescent shape where people could travel, because the Arabian desert was there in the middle, and you don't cross the desert. It's a straight line. We know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. They didn't go straight line across the desert because you'd never make it. They went up through the Tigris, Euphrates river valleys and then down into the Levant, because there was water. There was cultivated crops that they could eat along the way. You had to go through what was called the Fertile Crescent. And so here in verse 6, he says, how Esau has been pillaged. If thieves come to you and plunderers by night, how have you been destroyed? Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? Normally, if someone is stealing, they're going to take what they need and what they can carry. They can't carry everything, so they're just going to take what they want. Or if they're stealing grapes, they're going to take the grapes that they can eat. But God is saying, wouldn't they just leave some behind? God is saying they're not going to leave anything behind. You're going to be totally devastated. How Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. All of your allies have deceived you. They have driven you to the border. Your confederates have prevailed against you. Your trusted friends have set a trap under you. There is no understanding of it, or you have no understanding. You sit at the table with your friends, and they're plotting evil against you. They're drinking your wine. They're eating your food. You're having a good meal together. You think that they're your friends, but all the while they're looking at your stuff and saying, I think I'm coming back. Middle of the night. Middle of the day, I'll just kill you, and then I'll take it. So I can take my time, search all your secret spots, places where you hide stuff, and I'll take it all. I'll take all of it. And God is saying through Obadiah, I'm sending those guys to do that to you because of your sins. What sins? Well, just take a look at these here. In verse 9, and your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman. This is a city of Edom. So that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. Now, verse 10 gives us some of the reasons for that. Because, or for the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. Let me just pause here and say, God promised Habakkuk that he would send the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, to destroy the people of Judah because of their sins, which Habakkuk was noticing and observing with dismay. How long are you going to allow all these sins to continue, God? And God says, glad you asked. Not so long. I'm raising up the Babylonians right now, and they're going to wipe you out. And Habakkuk says, but wait a minute, they're worse than we are. God says, no, don't worry, the just shall live by faith. In the meantime, the Edomites, when they see the Babylonians come, they says, oh, this is great. We can open up the gates, we can let them in, we can be friends with them, and tell them to kill the people of Judah, which we hate anyway. We hate them. And so the people of Edom are facilitating the Babylonians. God's in control of all this, right? Remember, he works in mysterious ways, and he uses operatives that may not even know that they're operating on his behalf. Big long-term scheme. For them, they were just wanting to conquer and get more stuff. For the Edomites, they weren't going to fight the Babylonians. We're just going to let them come through. Go for it. We'll help you. We'll create an alliance between you. You're our friends. Let's be friends. Those people of Judah, they're not worth much. Just destroy them. That's good. God is saying here that you're culpable for doing that behavior, Esau, and you're going down for it. On the day you stood aloof, verse 11, he says, the day the strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. If you look in the continuing verses there, but you should not have gloated over the day of your brother. Did they gloat? Yep. They were having a good time when these people were being destroyed. Their own brother, their own flesh and blood was being destroyed by this foreign nation of Babylon. They were gloating. So this is great. You guys used to think you were so high and mighty, David, and Solomon, and Rehoboam, and you're going down now. We're having fun. In the day of his misfortune, you should not have rejoiced over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. But they were rejoicing. Let me just mention something to you that stands out to me in 9/11 from our own time. I know I'm running out of time here. But you know what really dismayed me? After we had these twin towers be destroyed, the airplanes flying in the towers, there were reporters over in the land of Palestine and certain Arab communities where the women of the Arab communities were jumping and dancing and rejoicing with great joy, and they were just happy that America had suffered greatly. And that was astonishing to me, just to see that vision, like, really, this is not a tragedy. This is, you are rejoicing over that, which, of course, that's where the perpetrators of the terrorism that took place on 9/11 were from that community. When I read the scriptures here, I'm saying, you know, these are the descendants of the same folks that did this way back there. It hasn't changed much, has it? You should not have boasted in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of his calamity, which of course is what they did, because the Babylonians wouldn't take everything and they could go and get a few things for themselves after the Babylonians had left. You should not have gloated over the day of his disaster, in the day of his calamity. You should not have looted his goods in the day of his calamity. In other words, this judgment is coming upon you, Edomites, because of what you did to your brother when the Babylonians destroyed them. You should not have stood in the parting of the ways to cut off his fugitives. Think about it. Some of the people that were being persecuted by the Babylonians were running for their lives, and the people of Edom were saying, nope, you're not coming through here. You stay there. Go back. There's people pursuing you with swords. No problem. Go back. All of these are very detailed, but you have to be able to put this in the context of that history. If we don't put this in the context there, we read this and say, I have no clue what this is talking about. Just gibberish to me. Let me go back to Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. I like that. It's easier to read that stuff. But let me say, brothers and sisters, this has rich material for us if we take the time to discern it. As I mentioned, another map here. You've got Teman that was mentioned. This again is south of Judah and Israel on this other side of the Jordan. And then verse 13, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Let me just go to the next slide here. So for the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. Don't worry about the Hebrew up there. That's just for illustration. But that is the language that the Bible was written in the Hebrew text. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. That's universal truth. The Bible tells us in example after example, Jacob was a liar over and over. Yes, I am Isaac. Give me the blessing. I am your son. Here, feel my arms. Oh, feels hairy just like Esau. I guess you are him. No, he's a deceiver. Did the sons of Jacob deceive him when they brought back the coat that he had made for Joseph, filled with animal blood? The conclusion that Jacob came to was the wrong conclusion, because Joseph was actually very much alive. And he lived to see that. But the point of the idea is the same. What goes around comes around. Jesus said, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. The Apostle Paul said, how shall you reap? You shall reap what? What you sow, you will reap. If you do this, you're going to get it back to you in spades. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what the text is saying here. And the people of Edom thought that they were getting away with stuff. And God says, not so fast. You're going down. And again, keep in mind that this isn't a message for Edom. It's a message for God's people of Judah. Even though they're feeling the pain, and some of them are in shambles and the others are carried off into Babylonian captivity, God says, all of what's taken place will be resolved. It will come to fruition. For as you have drunk upon my holy mountain, all nations round about shall drink. They shall drink and stagger as though they had not been. But in Mount Zion, go to verse 17. Notice it says, but in Mount Zion, this is the reversal. This is, what's going to happen to the people of Edom is one thing. What's going to happen to the people of Judah? In Mount Zion, there shall be those who will escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. If you're stubble and your neighbor is flame, you're being consumed. Was that the second bell? First bell. Okay. They shall burn them and consume them. There shall be no survivor to the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So, if you look at verse 19, those of the Negeb shall possess Mount Esau. Those of the Shephelah, the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The idea is that the people of Israel and Judah who have been in captivity will get to come home one day. And all of those people who had troubled you, who were your enemies, including the Babylonians and the Edomites and Esau, they're going down and you're going up. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. Those that were on top are going on bottom. Those that thought they were living with the eagles in the stars, and that they thought that no one could bring them down, God says, I'm bringing you down, and I'm lifting up my people, Judah, instead. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. That's the gist of what's going on here in the book of Obadiah and in all of the prophets. What are the themes? Sin. The sin of the people of Israel and Judah, and then secondly, the sin of the nations round about. Judgment that's coming on the people of Israel and Judah. by the hand of those enemies that God is using temporarily to accomplish his purposes. And then 3, it's not going to stay that way. There's going to be hope for the future. You'll get to go back to your land, and they'll be gone. And your enemies will be gone. And I'm lifting you up, and I'm tearing them down. And beyond that, there will be a kingdom, a new covenant, a Savior. All the prophets don't give that detail. Like Jeremiah chapter 31 is not in all the minor prophets. It's in Jeremiah 31. It's quoted twice in the book of Hebrews, right? Chapter 8 and in chapter 10. But the meaning and the context of all of that world history in the ancient times is found right here in these books we call the prophets. So next week, we will look at the prophet Jonah. This is going to be going back a little bit to the Assyrian period of time rather than the Babylonian period of time. As I say, the books of the Bible aren't always canonically placed in chronological order. I think the narrated Bible is an edition of the Bible that you can buy that is placed in chronological order to kind of help us think about that. But that's our imposition. That's our editorial work of putting that upon the text itself. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. We'll continue with this next week.